There are three things in life that are guaranteed: death, taxes, and James Franklin losing to Ohio State. He is 1-10 as the head coach of Penn State against this program, and every time he goes up against the Buckeyes, he just has nightmares because for some reason he can't crack the code to taking down Ryan Day in this program. And the big reasons for why James Franklin struggles against Ohio State is, for one, anytime you watch these two teams play, it's an obvious gap in talent between the two. Ohio State, they're a tier one program in the Big Ten. They got an elite roster. They spent $20 million on this team. They got dynamic weapons at receiver. Jeremiah Smith, who's a true freshman, only 18 years old. He's been making big plays all season long. You got Emeka Ibuka. You also got Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. They just have so much firepower on offense. But when you look at Penn State, though, they don't have the same amount of talent on offense that Ohio State does. Now, you would think that they would with how well James Franklin recruits. Penn State is normally recruiting at a top 10 level every single season. But when you watch James Franklin's Penn State teams against Ohio State, you can see the clear gap between these two programs. Ohio State, they're a tier one program because they're a national championship caliber team. Penn State, they're a playoff caliber team. And these losses that James Franklin keeps suffering to Ohio State further shows how far Penn State is from ever being able to be the top dog in this conference. That's why they're a tier 2 program. They're a little bit beneath Ohio State and Oregon because they don't have the weapons at receiver that those two teams do. And initially, I believe that Penn State offensively was bound to struggle in this game because their biggest Achilles heel is their inability to generate explosive plays in the passing game. Why is that when you brought in a new offensive coordinator in Nicolo Nicky from Kansas? The offense was looking explosive until you played this game. Well, when you only have a great tight end and nobody else at receiver, these are the outcomes that you get on offense because your receivers have to be able to win outside. They have to be able to win in one-on-one coverage, and Penn State's receivers don't have the ability to do that. And the big concern about Penn State coming into this season was their lack of talent and proven commodities at receiver. Because you got Julian Fleming from the transfer portal, and this dude has had like a million injuries over the last couple of years. We all knew that this dude wasn't going to be much of a difference maker. When you are playing against Ohio State, the key to beating this team is that you have to be able to get a lot of plays in the vertical passing game, which Penn State couldn't do in this game. When Oregon beat Ohio State, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, and Dylan Gabriel, they were working Ohio State secondary, not just in the short passing game, but in the vertical pass game as well. Penn State doesn't have the ability to do that. They can't stretch the field because they're not dynamic enough at receiver to do so. And I was talking to my dude, College Football with Sam, and I brought this up, and he was saying, yeah, they don't got a lot of talent at receiver, but they always got great tight ends. Just because you have great tight ends doesn't mean that it makes up for you not having elite talent at receiver. Because Ohio State is wide receiver you. Think about all of the teams that have won national championships over the last couple of years. Georgia, as much as we like to harp on Stetson Bennett not really being that good and having a good supporting cast around them, the man was throwing the Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, all kinds of NFL caliber guys at wide receiver. Penn State doesn't have that. Last year, Carson Beck was good because he had Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers to lean on, but Drew Aller doesn't have those kinds of players outside of that outstanding tight end that you have. And you need a little bit more to go a little bit further than what Penn State is going to this season. This is still going to be a playoff team. They're probably going to finish out 11-1. You won't make it to the Big Ten championship, but at least you're going to get an at-large bid where maybe you get to host a playoff game depending on your seeding, or maybe you can go on the road and get a favorable matchup like against Miami or Tennessee or Alabama. I still see Penn State being able to win a playoff game, but I don't see them being able to get further than the second round of the playoffs, because if you got to go up against a team like Texas, or you got to go up against Oregon or rematch against Ohio State, you're going to get your lunch money took. And that's another problem that I notice about these Penn State games against Ohio State coached by James Franklin. For some reason, as good as what Penn State normally is on the defensive line and the offensive line, when they play Ohio State, man, they just get bullied up front. There was a key moment in this game when it's 2013. Penn State has 4 opportunities inside of like the 10-5, them punch it in and tie the game up, right? Tell me how these fools get stopped on 1st and goal, 2nd and goal, 3rd and goal, and 4th and goal. And on 3 out of 4 of those plays, they called the same play call. They were running it with the running back when they sent the dude in motion. They still were getting stuff right. In the year 2024, when you're that close to scoring, you got to do that tush push, man. It doesn't matter if you're only a yard or 3 yards out from scoring. The tush push is unstoppable. If you just would have used Drew Aller with all the size he has, I think he's like 6'4", 6'5", 220, 230 pounds. He was big enough to get it in and tie that game up. Why is it that you have to try to be the smartest guy in the room and their offensive coordinator, Nicole Nicky, and try to get a little bit cute, and then you're throwing it on 4th and goal? If you're going to be committed to running it in that situation, you might as well just continue to run it using the tush push. For some reason, Penn State, when they just play Ohio State just has to away with them up front. And last year, I felt Penn State was better going up against Ohio State in the trenches than what they showed this year, because their offensive line slightly kind of regressed a little bit, because you did lose a really good offensive tackle to the NFL. But with how well Penn State recruits on the line of scrimmage, you expect more when you're going up against a team like Ohio State. And James Franklin, in his press conference today, he seemed really upset about this loss, more than the previous losses to Ohio State, because this loss probably hit a little bit different when you thought about what could be for Penn State. If you could just beat this team, you would start to put yourself not just in the conversation of being a tier 1 program in the Big Ten Conference, but we could be talking about Penn State potentially winning the national championship. But the reason why they can't get over the hump is because they can't beat 2 teams, that being Ohio State and the other one beating Michigan. Now, if you were to play Michigan today, you probably would cream pie Michigan. But when you go up against Ohio State, you just have no answers. And I kind of felt a little bit bad for James Franklin, because this is somebody who is a really well-liked guy, recruits very well, wins a lot of games. At worst, James Franklin gives you a 10-win season. At his best, you can go 11-1, 12-0, but that's the problem. It feels like Penn State has peaked under James Franklin. And we have gotten to a point where we're starting to have the conversation about James Franklin that we used to have about Mark Richt when he was coaching at Georgia. Mark Richt, you always thought about what Georgia could be when he was their head coach. But then you look at the results and you're only 1 game away from making it to the national championship. Winning the SEC, you get stopped by a couple of yards in a running clock. You can kind of say the similar conversation is being had right now about James Franklin, because I do believe that this man is a good coach, but he's not a great coach because he can't win the big games. He's 1-13 all time against top 5 teams, which is unacceptable when you think about how people view Penn State year in and year out, this is always a consistent program when it comes to being in that playoff conversation. And with this playoffs expanding to 12 and eventually 14 teams, Penn State is always going to be a staple in this thing, but they're always going to be one of those teams that ends up being an early exit, and it's always going to be disappointing for the fan base because you're like, damn, like, we can't go no further than the second round of the playoffs considering how well we recruit, how good our coaching staff is. What is it going to take? And even James Franklin, he's asking himself the same questions. It always makes me laugh when reporters ask these coaches questions that they know they don't know the answer to. You keep asking James Franklin, why can't you beat Ohio State? You've been asking this man this question for nearly a decade, and he still doesn't have an answer for you. What is it going to take? He doesn't know. But what he has to figure out is how to find that missing puzzle piece to help Penn State take down this program. Because Ohio State is not beatable. Oregon beat them by a point. If Oregon can beat this team, so can Penn State. But you obviously see the gap in talent between these two programs. It's not huge, but there is a pretty considerable margin between these two programs because one program just is a wide receiver factory, and the other program hasn't had a first-round receiver since Jahan Dotson a few years back. And until Penn State can get more dynamic on the outside, you're going to continue to come up short. That interception that Drew Waller threw in the red zone was not on him. It was on the receiver because how you let the defensive back just snatch the ball from you? Come on, man. Have some fight. Have some toughness. You got to cherish that football, man. You only get so many opportunities to get your hands on that pitch scan, man. You just can't let the defensive back just snatch it away from you. Come on, man. Things like that. It's also an attitude thing. It's a mindset thing. When you saw Ohio State play today, they came out with juice. Although they were down 10-0, they didn't get rattled. You know, they didn't lose their composure. They stayed composed and they continued to execute. That's why they won this game in the fashion that they did. And this game probably could have been a little bit more one-sided. It probably should have been 27-6, but you got the Will Howard fumble. He had the pick six early. But if Will Howard played mistake-free football, Ohio State rolls Penn State. Because Drew Waller, I don't believe he's overrated. The problem is that these wide receivers, anytime they go up against an elite defense, they can't create no separation. I remember when I was watching Penn State play Iowa last year, and I was shocked they struggled in that game because I'm like, bro, you're Penn State. You should be annihilating Iowa. This is a team that only wins off defense and special teams. They have zero offense, but Iowa, you know, their defense gave Penn State's offense a lot of fits because they had a really good secondary. And Drew Waller, the dude was hung out to dry because he only had one guy to throw the football to, which was number 44 at tight end. And that dude is something special. And I could see him being a first-round pick in next year's draft, but that's a conversation for a different day. But until Penn State can get more dynamic wide receivers and they can have a different kind of mentality up front on the line of scrimmage, they're going to continue to get bulldozed by Ohio State and Oregon and Michigan because they just don't have that mean streak that you look for in the guys that's playing on the line of scrimmage. You know, when I saw Penn State get shut down and denied from scoring in the red zone 4 straight times, that showed me everything I needed to know about Penn State up front from a line of scrimmage standpoint. You just don't have the physicality. Ohio State's offensive line isn't that good, but at least they were really good at opening up holes in the run game. Ohio State ran for 176 yards against your defense, which is really impressive considering how good Penn State's defense normally tends to be from a year-to-year basis. They always have a top 15, top 25 defense, but you just don't have any toughness or physicality up front on your defensive line and on your offensive line when you go up against Ohio State, and it never makes any sense to me. because it's not like you're getting just out recruited up front by Ohio State. You produce as many defensive linemen, edge rushers as what Ohio State does. So why is it that it's just you go into these games and for some reason you just tend to play your worst football in these games. And if you erase the costly turnovers that Will Howard had, this would have been really ugly for Penn State. And this was at home, by the way, too, which makes it even more embarrassing. I saw James Franklin get into it with the fan after the game, but can you blame that fan? Everybody's frustrated. They want to know when are you going to be able to get it done. And listen, I love James Franklin. I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite coaches, but man, this was a really difficult loss to swallow to be a Penn State fan.